Okay, if we'll come to order, please. If you'll register your presence by voting yes. (17) present. We have a quorum. If John will run the emergency evacuation procedures.
Before we get started, let me read the emergency evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency evacuation, an alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by way of the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you have reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Please be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles.
Mr. Clerk, if you'll read the call, sir.
Call for a special meeting of the Blount County Board of Commissioners to be held in room 430 at the Blount County Courthouse in Maryville, Tennessee on Monday, June 3, 2013 at 5:30 p.m. pursuant to and in accordance with the authority vested in me by Tennessee Code annotated section 5-5-105. I hereby call the Board of County Commissioners of Blount County, Tennessee to meet in special session on the 3rd day of June 2013, 5:30 p.m. at the Blount County Courthouse in Maryville, Tennessee to discuss the proposed Blount County fiscal year 2013-14 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The way we'll proceed this evening is each member will have 2 times with the floor, 5 minutes at each time, and we'll go by district. So at this time, I'll recognize Commissioner Kirby, District 10, Seat A.
Chairman. As we look at the 215, keeping the tax rate at 215 and moving 9 cents around from 101 into the schools to make up maintenance effort, is anything, Mr. Vineyard, anything else come along on that? We're still at the $1.6 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the only thing that everyone else has got a status quo budget we could live with, and we're taking 9 cents from that and moving it into the schools. And my concern will be 9 cents this year and be 18 cents next year. We talked about it in the budget committee, and I want to hear what the other 20 commissioners can come up with a better solution than what the budget committee brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pass it this time.
I just have a few questions. I don't know who can answer them, but in going over the budget, there's a couple of line items that are in several different cost centers that I'm not sure what they are. One line item is 189, and it says it's other salary and wages, and it's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to say 35 account numbers. In the line 399 is other contracted services, and I don't know what they are. And you're looking at $4.5 million in both those two line items. And I'm just curious, I think the highway department has one, the sheriff's department has one, the school have one, jails, different juvenile services, the commissary, civil defense, local health center. I mean, all the different account numbers have these particular line items in their cost centers or account numbers. And I'm curious, it lists supervisor salary, it lists worker salary, clerical salaries, it lists all the salaries in there. And then it has other salaries and wages. I'm just curious what those are for. If we've got everybody listed as far as salaries go, what's other salaries and wages? And what are other contracted services? Two in particular, and I'm not picking on anybody, it just kind of glared out at me. Two in particular was, I think, the jail, which was account number 54210. And in the year 2000, in the budget year 2012, it was $7,681. And it jumped to $830,000. And I think the other one was highway and bridge maintenance. In the year 2012, the other contract, the salary and wages jumped from $50,000 to $250,000, and the other contracted services jumped from $84 to $325. And those are healthy jumps. I was just curious, have we changed the way we were doing something, or those are a couple of questions that just kind of, when I looked at the appropriation side of the budget, that just kind of glared at me. If somebody could answer those, if not, maybe we can get an answer by next commission meeting. I was just curious what those were. And that's all I have.
Yield back. Commissioner Merle, you're recognized.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Vineyard about the insurance for and I should have asked you this, but I forgot to ask you this. What amount of revenue are we going to be receiving for insurance? What increase for employees' benefits? And when does that take effect, January 1st, or what's the dollar amount?
The insurance adjustments that were approved by commission take place for the plan year, which is a January 1 plan year, and the increase, the revenue that's generated from that is a result of the employee contributions that the commission has approved.
Right, and do we know what the total revenue estimate will be based on the number of employees?
When I get the information up here, I'll share that with you in a minute. I'm
thank
sorry.
You. Can we reserve our second question for later as things come
We'll
up?
be coming back with 5 more minutes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have anything at this time.
Commissioner Gamble's not present. Commissioner Green.
Thank you. I guess my only concern is, thinking about this, I don't know really about the school, how much they need, but when we move these things around, I see other things that we're not touched on. And I hope we're not going to shortfall somebody else because dealing with one issue. Because I got a lot of confidence in the commission that brought that forward, but my concern for the other departments, I really don't have a question right now.
Commissioner Folks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question on the information the mayor made available. It takes $2.7 million to meet our obligations for maintenance of effort to the schools. 2.7 results in 1.6 to our schools. But later on in his letter, he says the proposal will use $3.3 million of the general fund balance. So where's the other $600,000 going?
Capital.
Capital for what?
Information services and the sheriff's department.
What in the sheriff's department?
The same items that is in the current year budget, which would be communication equipment, vehicles, and parts. And then in IT, it is for computer replacements.
Well, that's a good deal more in the proposed budget than $300,000. The vehicles are $690,000.
Vehicles are $500,000, parts are $190,000, communication equipment makes up the rest of that, so the total is about $984,000, all the items that I've identified.
And what you're saying is $600,000 of that's coming out of the fund balance.
That's correct.
Okay. That leads me to another question. Page 63 of the budget shows $313,273 for communications equipment for the sheriff's department. Is this the lease payment, or is this additional equipment in addition to the $4.5 million worth of equipment we bought 3 years ago?
It's the payment on the current obligation for leases.
It's a lease payment, okay. Page 58 of the proposed budget shows contributions to other agencies going from $39,000 last year to $112,240 this year. What's going on there?
I don't have the detail. I assume you're pulling the detail off of the website?
This is right off of the budget you gave us.
On the website.
Proposed budget.
My draft's coming up here. I don't have it in front of me right now.
Okay.
That'll be a short.
Well, rather than use my time, if you could look that up.
Page 58, did you say?
It's page 58. Well, it's page 58 on the one that we were given the link to. 58 here, 69 up here. Oh, okay. 58 up here, 69. It's marked page 50. Yeah, okay. All right. This proposed budget's been described as status quo budget. To me, status quo means no change. But the proposed budget is increasing. Make no mistake about it. At the very least, status quo should mean that the budget is not increasing at a rate greater than inflation. Most families' incomes are barely keeping up with inflation, and they are having to manage their spending accordingly. To get a better handle on whether we really have a status quo budget, I compared the proposed budgets of 45 county departments with the actual amount that they spent last year. I then compared the increase with the 3.4% inflation reported by the federal government that we've experienced over the last 2 years. Any budget that grew by less than 3.4% would meet this kind of expanded status quo description. Out of 45 departments that we reviewed, only 6 are proposing budgets that grow at less than the rate of inflation. 6 out of 45. These 6 deserve some recognition and applause because they are the exceptions. County buildings, managed by Damon Fortney, who will actually cut his spending compared to last year. The county clerk, Roy Crawford, also will cut his spending this year in the proposed budget. Data processing, managed by John Herron, will grow spending
less than the rate of inflation.
Members' time's expired. Mr. Helton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not have any questions at this time.
Commissioner Lael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll reserve my time for later. Thank you.
You'll have 5 minutes the next time. Yes, okay. Commissioner Carver, you're recognized.
I do have a question for Mr. Vineyard. In looking at the budget, if we were to pull from our fund balance, what would that do to our credit rating? Or what could it possibly do to our credit rating?
I had distributed to you that some handouts there that address that point. To quantify that, first off, the simple answer to if we use our fund balance, if I understand your question, if we use our fund balance, what does it do to our credit rating? The simple answer is, I don't know for sure, but it's not going to be that good in my opinion. Using fund balance for non-recurring expenses is an acceptable practice. Using it for operating expenses is generally frowned upon. What I had asked PFM to do, and you have benefit of that synopsis in front of you, is if we took an imaginary bond issue of $10 million over 30 years, I've given you an example of what we would expect to pay for a AA credit, which is Blount County's current credit rating. I put in there if we were to receive a decrease in our credit rating of 1 notch, that would be an A+. And I've also had them put in there if we were to receive an upgrade in our credit rating of 1 notch, that would make us a AA credit rating. And I've quantified, as I mentioned to those of you that I had conversations with, that's something I wanted to do and let you make your own judgment. There are a number of factors that come into that decision. It's a function of the economy, it's a function of how well we operate and manage ourselves, and it's a function of market conditions, quite frankly.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have 2 quick questions. What was the value of the penny, Mr. Vineyard, that we developed the budget on last year, the 2012-13?
The current year budget, 2012-13, was predicated on a $310,000 penny. A penny would equal $310,000.
Okay, and what is the estimate we're developing it on this year, sir?
The proposed 2013-14 is estimated to be $304,500. And that would be a 96% collection rate.
Okay, so we're actually going to base this year's budget on the value of the penny $5,500 less than last year.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Hasty, you're recognized.
I got a few things. The resolution that's before us here in our resolution fixing just made it small, fixing the tax levy in Blount County, where the pennies broke down to $2.15. I guess my one question that I have at first is this how we're going to divide this up? Is this based on the wheel tax passing?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. And then I guess, you know, in my conversation with you, I'm going to ask you again, is the route that we're going and looking at here, is this going to be a long-term fix, or is this something that next year it's going to be a whole lot worse than if we stick with the 215?
The proposal that you have in front of you, that you identified on the proposed property tax, the value of the property tax and how it's to be distributed, and the appropriation resolution, in my opinion, is not a long-term solution.
Okay, and what would that alternative solution in your, I mean, I know in your judgment, what would that be?
The handout that I've provided you gives you some insight to that. I think I've identified those things as risks, as I see them in my professional judgment, that this budget does not address. We have spent a great deal of time in the Budget Committee, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank them for all the time they put into this, and a few of you who have attended those meetings. We had over 8 meetings, and they were not short. And I appreciate the time and effort everybody put in. We've had additional meetings aside from that with department heads and office holders, as well as employee meetings that we held related to all the insurance dynamics that we've been discussing over these last several months. So there's a lot that went into this. Those risks include some things that are not funded in this proposed budget that you need to be aware of, and it would be additional funding requests for 911, additional funding requests for GIS. There is no provision for employee pay increases across the board in this budget proposal. If you recall some of the what our sister governments in the area are doing, we would be an outlier from what they are doing, or out of the norm for what they're doing. We've talked a great deal about maintenance of effort. There is no additional provision for funding for the education system beyond maintenance of effort. And then there are other needs that we've discussed, capital and otherwise, that the Highway Department, the Sheriff's Department, and other departments have identified. We've got significant technology deficiencies, in my opinion, that have not been addressed in this proposal. So that's the basis for why I say this is not a long-term funding solution for the needs of Blount Countyans.
Okay. For right now, I'm going to stop.
Commissioner Kaler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Lewis.
Just a couple of things, I think, to expand a little bit on what Randy said. Because of the misestimation on the penny, is it 800,000, Randy, this year that we're going to be shy?
If you were to, the budget was predicated on $310,000 penny. It's going to be somewhere around 500 in reality, which is what we're estimating next year to be. So $5,500 times 215 pennies. And that's in the aggregate. That would be for schools, debt service, and general county.
Okay. But this current budget year, that's where we're going to be shy.
That's correct.
The issue with the recommendation that has come forward is that it's not a workable solution. We have, basically, we're talking about shoring up the budget by taking the money out of fund balance, which doesn't address anything about next year. And we know that we're going to be in the same position sitting here this time next year as we are this year. We already know year to date that sales tax revenue is down 3% from this time last year.
Total collections this year are running 3% less than for the same period of time last year.
So there isn't a lot of reason to think that there's going to be a lot of improvement between now and this time next year. So if we have to pull $3.3 million from an $8 million savings account in order to balance this budget, knowing full well that it doesn't address anything about next year's budget, then we're going to turn around and be in this same position. We can only do that for 2 years before we're out of money. Fund balance will be gone. We will be in the same position that the school system is in currently, which we have all said is not the way to get there. But here we are, considering doing exactly the same thing. So that's my concern, is that instead of addressing the problem, is that we're postponing the problem. And the way we're doing it is by spending the amount that we have in fund balance, hoping things will get better when indications are, and the facts would state that they're not. And that's all I'm going to talk about right now.
Commissioner Harrison, you're recognized.
Just from what I'm hearing out there talking to the public, there's a huge outcry of just, why can't they just live within their budget 1 year? Why can't they just maintain? We've got several entities here to consider, and it seems like one is trying to get all the cookies, which is causing a lot of hardships and divisions and a lot of consideration. And then it's our job to say no or just a little bit more. So we've done some things. We've put these things on balance, on the ballot, but I think it's getting real close to where we're going to have to stand up and do our jobs, and that may be just letting them maintain during these tough times, because I can tell you out there for the people, it's really tough. It's really tough. They're going out left and right, and I don't see how we can put more burden on them at this time. We've been in a depression. We've just kind of got to the bottom and just starting back up. Let's do our part and don't knock them back down. That's all I got to say at this time.
Commissioner Birchfield, you're recognized.
I first want to say thanks to Randy. He put something together for us to look at our fears. And our fear is 2 years from now or next year, at least that's my fear, is that we are going to be in a world of hurt if we move these pennies the way that he's asked. One thing that I'm glad he did for me is the property tax rates. If we actually have to raise taxes, and I'm not saying we will, just look at the numbers. Because the thought of us losing our credit rating and us using all our fund balance is very scary. And I just want everybody to think about that. I wish I had a solution, and that's what I guess we're all here to find. And I hope we can find one.
Commissioner Burkhalter, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Vineyard, where did you get the budget that for the schools that was put in the newspaper, the 81 million? Where did that budget come from? Because I went to the school board hearings and I never saw them pass an $81 million budget. Just simply curious where that came from.
That was the information we got from the school system that was presented to the budget committee.
But not during a budget hearing? Was that outside of a budget hearing?
What was distributed during the meeting.
Second question is, according to the general attorney's opinion on the maintenance of efforts where we have to revenue derived from local sources must equal or exceed prior year actual revenues. Does that mean that we need to give them both 1.6 million between now and the end of this year, so their actual revenue for 2012, 2013 equals last year's actual revenues? And do we also have to give them 1.6 million because of the mess up in the penny valuation this past year? Is it a double-edged sword or just a single-edged sword?
I would consider that a single-edged sword.
So we only have to do one. We don't have to do both.
Well, we're looking at what the actual collections are estimated to be and not really comparing that against what the budgeted amount is. So you wouldn't want to double penalize ourselves for missing the assumptions of how our budget was predicated and then miss it on the actual collection side. It is whatever the actual numbers in collections are and what the estimated collections are,
So,
irrespective of the budget.
Right, but we can push that forward to next year instead of having to pull out a fund balance this year. We can wait until all the numbers come in and then pay that next year.
As I understand it, the way it would work, the current year, since obviously it won't be finalized as of June 30 this year, there is a test for the current year on maintenance of effort, and there's a test then for the FY 13-14 budget year also. And we have two separate calculations for that. The estimate for the current year is that we would fail the test based on current circumstances by somewhere around $1.8 million. And that test then would be satisfied by setting up a BEP reserve for the current year. Then we are predicating our estimate for next year based on what we think our actual collection should be, the budgeted amount. And then there will be some relationship, I would assume, to the current year as well.
And then the other question I have is, I noticed that from everything that I've been told is that the sales tax, the schools received less funding on the sales tax because of a couple of refunds that came through. Since those were one-time hits, what determines how the local option sales tax and the business tax evaluations and the trustees' collections from the prior year are all determined? Because it looks like that they were all reduced down going forward, which means we have to add pennies to make them balance out.
Your first point is with respect to sales tax collections. You are correct. There was an adjustment made earlier in the year because of a refund of sales tax that was granted to a current taxpayer because the use of what they paid sales tax on changed and they no longer had to pay sales tax on it. So they filed as they can under the law for a refund. And I think that is up to a 2-year window that any property tax, any sales tax payer has to file for that refund. That refund applied to prior years dating back, I believe, as far as 2005. That has only been done up through, I believe, 2008. And we are still susceptible to that same refund being applied for on all on all subsequent years from 2008 into the future.
But then who determines the value that's put in the budget for the trustees' collections? Because it looks like by lowering those down, it forces us to have to raise more on the penny to compensate.
The value on the trustees' collections are decided by the trustee and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my big concern is looking ahead, looking at the years here ahead of us. Also, debt service bothers me some. We've been putting 43 cents in for a long time, and we've never gained a lot on that. We have gained some. I know the schools is around 210 million, I believe it is. There's another thing that I'll bring out as far as the schools is that SRO officers, that's not included in their budget, which they get the benefit of. That's over $1 million there. in my opinion, that is in, well, it's in the sheriff's budget and all. I'm having problems. I think Mr. Green mentioned taking that 9 cents, 9 cents away from other agencies, giving to the schools. I don't know what that's going to do to them. I also have a problem with taking out a fund balance because we're not gaining anything. To me, that's just patchwork because we're going to look at it again next year and we're going to have problems next year, in my opinion. And you've got sales tax this year only down 3%, or down 3%, and I'm sure it'll be down more. I hope it comes up. I just think it will. So that's my feeling towards the budget. Thank you.
Dave answered pretty well what I was going to ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments. As was stated earlier by Mr. Vineyard, that he didn't think the proposal in front of us is a long-term solution. And my concern is if we go with this proposal, I think Commissioner Birchfield, Commissioner Lewis, and just recently Commissioner Melton alluded to it, is I go back to the old, what scares me is the old Fram auto parts commercial about paying me now or paying me later, and that scares me. It scares me what's coming down the pike if we look at this proposal in front of us. What the solution is, I wish I knew, but it just concerns me that next year is going to be a bad year.
I just have a quick question for Mr. Vineyard. It says our budget is $164 some million. What was our actual spend last year?
I don't have all of that. I can tell you just as it relates to General County, because I've been working with that in the last few days. The current year's budget, we're projecting to collect $2 million less than the budget, revenue-wise. And we're projected to spend $1.4 million less than is budgeted. In other words, we're expecting to be somewhere around $500,000-$600,000 short or in the red the current year, if that gives you an indication.
Well, when I look at this more detailed, there are multiple departments that are budgeting for more than what they spend, and it adds up. Every 20,000 or 11,000 or 5,000, it all adds up, and then you come to a budget, and that's why I was wondering, what did we really spend? I mean, a budget is out there to keep us below that. Mm-hmm. So if we spent 158 and now we're budgeting 164, and part of that's for the schools and part of that's for other things that were not in our budget. So that's why I wanted to know what our actual spend was.
I will get that for you for all funds, but that's a good flavor of what it is as far as the General County is concerned. That's okay. Part of the changing of the culture a little bit. We've always done budget to budget comparisons, and quite frankly, the ones that are more meaningful are what are you proposing budget wise versus what you're spending, which is what you're describing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wright, recognized for the second time.
I have no questions.
Commissioner Folks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a solution to this problem. We could do what our citizens do, live within our income and not take money out of the fund balance. And there's certainly opportunity to do that. let me just finish what I started. We said we had a status quo budget. Well, even expanding the definition of status quo to include inflation, let's take a look at some of the budgets we're getting. The mayor's office proposes to grow at nearly 3 times the rate of inflation, his budget. Personnel proposes to grow at 40 times the rate of inflation. Election Commission proposes to grow at 24 times the rate of inflation. That is from last year's actual to the proposed budget. Register of Deeds proposes to grow 6 times the rate of inflation. Purchasing, 3 times the rate of inflation. Probation Services, 14 times the rate of inflation. And yeah, I know probation brings in money, but there's a problem there. Their revenue is going to increase by 21%, but their expenses are going to increase by 49%. That doesn't sound like a tight budget to me. The total for all sheriff's departments is increasing 2.6 times faster than inflation. Animal control will increase by more than 7 times the rate of inflation. Parks and Rec will grow at 4 times the rate of inflation. This, to me, seems extraordinary for an organization that has $1 million of unspent money. All this leads to a general fund budget that, compared to last year and the proposed spending, is going to grow at nearly triple the rate of inflation. Now, if that's a tight budget, I guess I'm missing something. And that's just a sample. I don't have time to give all the details since we changed the rules tonight. If a status quo budget is supposed to mean a tight budget where we fit our spending to our income, this is not what we have in front of us. Our citizens are having to keep their spending within their incomes that are growing at or less than the rate of inflation. Why can't we do the same? Thank you.
Mr. Helton, you're recognized for a second time.
Thanks, sir. Budget Director, at what point did we realize that we were coming in under what the penny was being appraised at?
I believe that was last fall.
Okay.
Is when we started discussing the budget committee, and I think I even made a comment in response to a couple questions at commission meetings thereafter.
Was there any money distributed to Maryville and Alcoa on the 310 tax rate?
No, sir.
Okay.
The way that is allocated, it's allocated after collected.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'm through.
Commissioner Lael, you're recognized.
Thank you. I noticed you gave this sample of and apparently a 9-cent increase. What would be the distribution of that additional 9 cents should that occur? In your example here, you gave an example of a 9-cent.
On the 9 cents shift in the pennies?
No, apparently this indicates a 9-cent increase in property taxes.
Are you talking about the rate sheet, the rate one? That was a piece of information that the Budget Committee asked that I prepare for the full commission to make you aware in the event that the commission in its deliberations was not interested or were not enthused about the proposal from the Budget Committee. What was an alternative would be 9 additional cents. That is all that's for, is an additional piece of information for your consideration only.
Is that a recommended number, or I mean,
no,
why,
sir.
Why 9 cent?
No, sir. It was in the context of in shifting 9 pennies.
9 cents as opposed to increasing 9 cents.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Illustration purposes only.
All right. Secondly, whenever I think the time frames are kind of important here. Mr. Helton alluded to on when we realized that the penny was not going to generate, and that was during the fall that was determined. By that time, though, we had already set the budget for the next year based on the $310,000. What would cause that differential to occur? It may take a short explanation of how the penny is determined anyway. For a lot of people may want to hear that. We basically didn't change a whole lot of things that I know of that would change that. In fact, I would have thought the penny might have increased in value according to some of the additions that were made across, the county with additional homes, businesses being added, etc. What would cause the penny to go down?
Let me start.
As a way of trying to determine something to avoid that in the future.
Let me start with what we did for the budget proposal that's in front of you.
Okay.
And this was distributed to the budget committee. I sat down with the property assessor, and I had a separate conversation, ongoing monthly, with the trustee. And we sat down and went through each class of property and what the values of those classes of property entailed, including what we might estimate to get from the state on public utilities. The values were provided by the property assessor, as they should be. And then we made some determination with input from the assessor's office and with heavy input from the trustee's office on what we estimated the collection rate to be. As to the current year's problem, I only can speculate. I wasn't here when that value was shared with you. It appeared to me it was set at 100% collection instead of discounted for the amount we would collect.
Okay, that kind of explains, because normally in the past the practice had been at less than 100% collection to give that leeway in there. On the sales tax refund, does that have to come in terms of a one-time payment, or is that prorated out just like it was assigned to them on a prorated basis, more or less? Or does that have to come out as one lump sum?
The way it was handled this year was a lump sum.
Okay.
And you might imagine that was quite a sticker shock to the cities and to the county.
Definitely was. And you said that came about in the fall. Do you have a time on that?
I don't know about this.
Because again, we had set the budget.
Yeah, all
back
this
in
happened.
June.
All this happened after the budget was adopted by the commission, and the fall was when I recall the value of the penny. We determined that it was off.
Okay.
And I think the refund was after that. I'm not for sure on that one, to be exact.
Well, a lot of that, what I'm looking at is possible methods of avoiding surprises like that in the future, because that's a killer. And basically, that's kind of what's got us in this bind, is that we had pretty much set the budget based on what we were anticipating. And
Thank you. Your time's expired. Commissioner Carver, you're recognized.
It more of a statement. It just really concerns me that we're going to deplete our fund balance and hurt our possible rating, credit rating. It's a shame that 3% collection was not caught and understood, but my concern is that we are going to hurt what we've tried to build back up over the last few years, that fund balance. And the opportunity for us to reduce that amount of debt with a new interest rate is something that I would be in favor of trying to do. So that's more of a statement I have there. It's just my concern about that.
Commissioner Hasty, you're recognized.
I guess if I could, and I don't know if it's proper at this time, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but all of our questions, and I understand, gone to Randy, and he's answered them very well. I'd just like to ask the mayor, what is your opinion on the proposal before us And I keep going back to, I turned it off. I keep going back to, is this a short-term fix or a Band-Aid that's going to get us in bad trouble? I would like to know, as you're, I guess, chairman of the budget committee, and I know we'll be the one voting on it, but I guess I'm asking for some leadership from you and your opinion of the stuff that Randy's sent to us and the proposed budget.
First of all, I want to say that it was a very tough decision for the whole budget committee when this was put in front of us. Is it a short-term fix? Absolutely. It's short-term. There was three options that we have, and this is, I guess, the three options that's in front of you all. Do nothing, take the 9 cents from the fund balance, or raise taxes. And of those three options, we sat and discussed it, and of course, you know, do nothing means that we open ourselves up. There's possible lawsuits that can be filed by the school system because we're not meeting the maintenance of effort. There's other consequences from the state that we may be facing if we don't meet the maintenance of effort. So those are one of the reasons we didn't choose that. The second was pull the 9 cents from the fund balance, because there was no one on the budget committee wanted to discuss a tax increase. This was the only option that was there. Is it a fix? It's a temporary fix. That's all it is. Next year we will be faced with even a bigger problem, and honestly, Mark, that's where we're at. And but it was the decision of the budget committee that the B solution was the 9 cents out of fund balance.
Well, I guess there again, I'm putting you on the spot, and I don't mean to, but is this the route you think we should go?
I think at this time, this is the only option we have, yes.
Good enough for me. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things to bring up. 2010-11, we're at a 204 rate. 2011-12, we went to 215. Understand that in the 2010 and 11, schools received $1 out of that. They were cut to 99 cents. So when you make a statement, live within your budget, we cut them 1 cent when we had an 11-cent tax increase. That's number one. Go back and check the numbers if you don't think I'm right. It was not the school system's fault that we came up short on maintenance of effort. That's our fault. By law, we have to meet that. We have to fix it. Not them. Don't say live within your budget. That is their budget. That's what we have to come up with. So be very, very careful about criticizing when we based our figures in our budget last year off of $310,000, and that didn't come in. In sitting in the budget meetings, it appears that we actually came up $2-point-something million short on revenue. That's something we've got to deal with. It's not anyone's fault. You can't point fingers and say this department's wrong, that department's wrong. We have to adjust and go forward. Now, I think we just had some questions that needed answered tonight, but it's not a matter of sitting pointing fingers. You messed up, this department needs to do this department needs to do that. We need to get the facts out, but get all of the facts out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Vineyard and his staff and obviously our budget committee for at least giving us some options. I know a great deal of time was put in presenting us with our budget proposal, and I want them to know that that work does not go unnoticed. We've spent a lot of time talking about big issues, And I agree. I am terribly concerned about shifting 9 cents out of General County. I'm terribly concerned about using our fund balance to shore up our operating expenses. But I want to go just a little bit deeper, and I want to refer to page 1 of the handout that Mr. Vineyard's staff gave us. I want us to not forget, with all of the huge things that we're looking at, some of the things that didn't get funded. And there's some important things there that I think warrants bringing just a little bit of attention to. GIS. I dare say there's a lot of people in the community that has not a real big idea how important GIS is to county government and city government for that matter. It's used a lot in public safety. It's used a lot from the property assessor's office. So let's just not forget the things that we weren't even able to consider in this budget proposal. E911. E911 is suffering a significant budget issue due to some billing changes with AT&T. The Blount County 911 Center is facing a $200,000 budget issue, or $200,000 worth of revenue that they were receiving that they're not going to be receiving now as a result of some changes in the way the billing is done. And let's not forget, when we dial that number, we do expect somebody to answer it. Jail staffing. We all know that we're looking at jail overcrowding as an issue right now. We're putting what I think to be, and listening to some of the comments, I'm on the jail expansion committee or overcrowding committee, and it was made very clear to me that we're exceeding our prisoner versus jailer ratio. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for liability on the county, and it's certainly not good for those people that we put in that place and expect them to maintain order. The property assessor's office. Where do we get most of our revenue? We need to be able to fund the office that determines exactly how much revenue we're going to be bringing in regard to our property taxes. And I want to save the last one. I'm going to save this for the last comment. I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again, but I think we tend to forget, and I want to remind people, that the single greatest resource that this county has is its people. And what did they get? Zippo.
Let me just go back, because all the comments obviously are very valid and great points to be made. The issue is, I mean, I don't think we can, from where we are today, knowing that we're short in the current budget. Troy, I hate to put you on the spot, but I do need to ask you because of the question Commissioner asked earlier. What is the approved school budget?
The approved budget that the Board of Education has submitted and requested is still the 86.8 million. Now, what the Budget Committee approved was 81 million on the revenue side, and I believe what we did in terms of the Budget Committee has to submit a balanced budget with 81 million. We balance that out of the teacher line. So just for that particular budget to be balanced, from the Budget Committee's recommendation, I think is 81 million. But the school board's recommendation and request is still 86.8 million.
So 5.7 or so shy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We have our obligation, regardless of what the school board adopts or doesn't adopt. Our obligation of that currently is 1.6 for next year. So it doesn't matter what their budget comes in at. We got to fund 1.6, and they've got to find the difference. So it doesn't really matter what the school board does or doesn't do. Our part of what we have to do as a county is 1.6. We know we got to fund that. That's one reason that I asked for Randy to put together what a 9-cent property tax increase would look like, rather than move 9 cents out of the general county budget. It seems to be a concern. One of the big concerns is that we take 9 cents out of the general county budget. What are we going to do then? Well, we're going to fund it out of fund balance. That's what we've said we're going to do. And then 2 years from now, we have no fund balance. Now, the 9-cent property tax would simply be able to fund the $2.7 million that we need to fund the school system at 1.6 because of split dollars. That's why the 9-cent property tax is on the sheet that you have. Nobody wants to do that, but nobody wants to go broke spending money that we're not replenishing. And in 2 years, we don't have it. In 1 year, we also don't have it. And we're sitting here exactly in the same spot that we are today if we take that money just out of fund balance. So the 9-cent property tax is in there because I asked that Randy include it so that this commission would have a third option to look at besides doing nothing that we know we can't do, and besides spending our savings down to a point that we're in the same position now that the school system faces. We've all said that wasn't a good decision. That's not a good way to do it. Yet we have that as an option in front of us. So I would just caution all of us to think long and hard about that before we make that decision. And then consider the other option, which would fund the $2.7 million, or actually fund the 1.6 that we're legally required to give to the school system. And that would be the other way to do it. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
No comment at this time.
This may seem a little naive of what I'm going to ask, but we have a maintenance effort with the school system. What other departments do we have a maintenance of effort that we have to meet? Are there any?
The highway department and I believe the sheriff has certain maintenance of effort requirements that we have to address. And library, I think, is what I'm being
The library?
advised.
Elections. Okay. Are we meeting those maintenance of effort issues being addressed, and are we over in those categories? In those departments, we have to fund the maintenance of effort. We have to have the money there for them. Are we over what, or is the budget more than what is required?
Based on what is being recommended to you right now, I believe we would comply with maintenance of effort requirements.
Okay. Again, this is going to be really off the wall. If we don't have a department that has maintenance of effort, is there any way that we can just across the board say, lose 2% of your budget, or just fund them for 2% less? Is there any way to do that, or is that just, are we going to come back a year from now saying, or in March going, we need more money, we're out of toilet paper, or we're out of paper, or our copiers are down?
I'm not an expert on maintenance of effort, but all maintenance of efforts are not necessarily the same standard that the school system Department of Education requirements are. For example, the highway department, and please correct me if I misspeak, the highway department standard is the average of 5 years, if I remember correctly. 3.
Oh, we've got the man back there.
5 years. So it's the average over 5 years. I think it's a little, in like schools, the maintenance of effort test, you're measuring revenue from local sources that we provide our local education system. And the standard there is you are presumed to not be in compliance and and supplanting local funding with BEP dollars. Now that's his oversimplification, but if you don't meet that test, that's a presumption.
Okay.
And not necessarily anyone's intent.
Okay. Is the sheriff's department and the highway department, it's a 5-year cycle, or?
It's an average. We get a
Average.
form and it lists the 3 past years, the current year, and the proposed year, I believe.
Okay. How does the sheriff's departments work? Or do y'all know?
Employment levels of the prior year.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to hurry with what I said. Again, I want everyone to keep in mind that if our fund balance plummets, our credit rating plummets, we have concerns. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vineyard, I know that in your opinion, it's not prudent to go this course of action. I believe you indicated that at the last budget hearing. And I also believe at one time that 9 cents is the Band-Aid that just fixes the school problem. Is that correct?
That's a fair statement.
So if I'm looking at this and if we're talking about a property tax increase, my figures are we're at least at a 22 to 25 cent property tax increase to get our entire budget balanced to where we're not using any fund balance at all. Would that be a correct statement?
I don't know. I've not made that calculation.
Where I pulled that from is we're going to be using 1.8 million out of debt service fund balance to balance that, correct?
We are not adequately funding our debt service fund, in my opinion.
By how much?
We're having to use fund balance each year to make our debt service payments.
By how much?
That varies each year.
Okay.
1.4 million in the proposed budget.
And the penny is worth 300,000?
Okay. I'm sorry.
And the penny is worth 300,000 for
304,
rounding?
500. Yes,
So
sir.
that's 5 cents that we need to put into debt service just to fund it for next year. We're not even looking ahead to the future. We are 9 cents for the schools. That just gets them up to where they're at break even. That's not even funding their full request, which is another 34 cents on top of that. And then just for our own general county, this year we're only 600,000 short. Mr. Helton in the property assessor's office has requested at least another 300,000 just to get his department back to where it was under Mike Morton's era of 2009, 2010. That's at least another penny. So I'm coming up that we are at 9.33. That's 42. Another 5, we're at 47, then another 4 for general county. We are a 51 cent property tax increase to where we're not working out a fund balance. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of where my math is leading me. If we're talking about not having to use fund balance at all, then we really need to be talking about a 51 cent property tax increase. I mean, because otherwise we're just coming back every other year saying, well, we're going to Band-Aid this, we're going to Band-Aid this one. Mr. Mayor, I know Mr. Hasty put you on the spot. Each one of us has been elected by a small group of this county. You represent the entire county. What do you think we need to do? Not looking at 1 year, not looking at re-election, what do you think we need to do to make Blount County be the best possible county it can be? Is it do nothing? Is it 9 cents? Is it 51 cents? Which one is it, Mr. Mayor?
At this time, with the three options that we were faced with, take the 9 cents out of the fund balance. If this is to continue next year, then we do have to look at cuts. There's going to have to be some pretty significant cuts all across the board. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, unless this commission is willing to do exactly what you're saying and raise taxes, which I don't think it's there to do it. I hope it's not. I think that before we do what we're doing this year, and then next year fall into the same with our budget doing exactly like it is this year and going down, then there's going to be cuts that are going to have to be made. It's either make significant cuts next year or you all decide to raise taxes. That's where we're at. It'll be one or the other.
Can we not give you back the budget and make the cuts this year so we don't prolong it another year?
If you choose to do that.
Thank you.